My mom, Linda, is one of the strongest women I have ever known. She raised three kids, me, my brother Danny, and my sister Karen, while building a career as a branch manager at a regional bank. So when her 25-year marriage to my biological father finally collapsed, I believed with my whole heart that she deserved whatever happiness came next. My bio dad was a manipulative, controlling man, but that is a story for another day. After the divorce, Mom started rebuilding. She was grieving, no question. Then she introduced us to Gary. Gary had a past, a DUI conviction that kept him on probation and required regular check-ins at the courthouse. I saw the red flags, but stayed quiet. Mom was lonely and healing, and Gary seemed to genuinely make her smile. The five of us moved in together, and things were surprisingly okay for a while. Gary and I even bonded over video games. Life felt stable. I let myself believe we were going to be fine. Then 2017 arrived and blew everything apart. One afternoon, Gary left for his routine probation check-in and never came home. Hours later, the phone rang. It was Gary, calling from Texas. The moment he walked into that courthouse, the FBI was waiting. His family, back in Texas, had been under investigation for gang activity and drug distribution, and Gary had been present in a vehicle during a drug exchange. That was enough to drag him in. Facing serious time, he agreed to testify against his family members in exchange for a reduced sentence and permission to remain free until the trial. Mom was devastated, but over a year of long phone calls, they decided to stay together and build toward a future when he returned. His employer, a regional warehouse where Gary had worked up to a supervisor position, agreed to hold his job. He came back, stepped right into it, and for a brief moment, things felt almost normal. Then the drinking started. A man with a DUI on his record is not a man with a healthy relationship with alcohol. What started as a few beers after work quickly became nearly half a 24-pack every single day, and Gary was vicious when drunk. He never got physical, but his words were a different story. Cruel, unpredictable, and sharp enough to leave real damage. Mom made excuses. Work stress. Trial pressure. He'll get better. We waited. He didn't. After several painful years, Mom finally hit her limit. Gary came home one night drunker than I had ever seen him. Mom was waiting. She asked him plainly if he had been drinking. He didn't even bother lying. She told him to leave, and he did. The next morning, she asked us to pat a bag of his basics so he wouldn't need to return until he sobered up. We were in the middle of doing exactly that when Mom's phone rang. It was Marie, a coworker of Gary's from the warehouse. Her voice was low and careful. She asked if Mom could meet her privately. Within the hour, they were sitting across from each other at a nearby coffee shop. Marie looked my mom in the eye and told her everything. Gary had been having a long-term affair with a warehouse employee named Patty. Marie had witnessed inappropriate behavior between them on company property. When she confronted Gary privately, he threatened her job immediately, told her that if she ever said a word to my mom, she was done. Marie had stayed silent out of fear, until now. Then she delivered the final blow. Patty was pregnant. Mom drove home, sat us down, and told us everything. What happened next was swift. We pulled every single thing belonging to Gary out of that house and dumped it all in the alley out back. The house was rented solely in Mom's name. No gray area, no debate. She called Gary and confronted him directly. He confessed without hesitation and without apology. He actually told her he was glad Patty was pregnant because he had always wanted a child of his own. Mom couldn't safely have more children. The three of us had already been difficult pregnancies, and her doctors were clear that another could be life-threatening. He said it without a shred of remorse. Mom arranged for him to collect his things from the alley with an officer present, and just like that, Gary was gone. Or so he thought. Mom was ready to move on. We were not. We contacted the warehouse ownership and laid out exactly what had happened: the affair on company property, the abuse of his supervisory position to silence Marie, all of it. Gary was removed and barred from every facility under that ownership group. Marie, for the record, eventually stepped into a leadership role. She had earned it. Gary relocated with Patty to a town about an hour away and found another warehouse supervisor job. We found out. We made another call. It took longer this time, but eventually that job disappeared too. Not long after, Gary started showing up in our neighborhood, slowly circling the block, watching. He was angry about the job losses and apparently thought hovering outside our home was a reasonable response. Problem was, his DUI probation had never been lifted, meaning Gary still had no valid license. He had never needed to drive when he lived with us, but here he was, out there alone behind the wheel. We called the police, told them about the vehicle we kept seeing, Patty's car, and that we believed Gary was driving it without a license. A few weeks later, we got word. Gary had been pulled over. No license, intoxicated. During the search of the home he shared with Patty, officers found firearms on the property. As a convicted felon, Gary was legally prohibited from possessing weapons. That added a serious stack of charges. By the time he finished that sentence, it was almost perfectly timed for his transfer back to Texas for the federal trial. His son was born while Gary sat in a prison cell. Patty, having had plenty of time to see Gary clearly, cut all contact while he was locked up. Gary responded by flooding Mom's mailbox with letters, bizarre combinations of apologies, desperate pleas, and blame-shifting rants, sometimes all three in the same envelope. Mom read none of them. She burned every single one. We eventually moved out of state and started fresh. From what we have heard, Gary got out of prison a few years ago. He is reportedly in Kansas now, fighting a child support case that Patty pursued through the courts. Mom has a new man in her life, patient, kind, and genuinely devoted to her. Danny and Karen have both moved on and built their own lives. I still live with Mom, and together we have been renovating the home she recently purchased. It is coming along beautifully. Life is pretty good. I was reminded of this whole story recently during a conversation with a coworker about cheaters and the consequences they bring on themselves. Some people assume they will never face accountability for how they treat others. Gary assumed that too.